least.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the meeting of the Portland Utility Board. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We are still waiting for a couple more members to join before we have quorum, but we're confident they're on their way. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely or by phone, and the city has made it available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting, as you heard, is being recorded, and the public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the meeting, and can also provide written testimony by emailing the board at utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. PUB believes and acts on anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with PUB. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. This means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth for us all. We act on these principles by speaking up and speaking out. Each person is empowered to maintain the culture of the PUB, and we focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, but not the person.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Just as an FYI for the record, we have reached quorum for the meeting. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by me, so please limit to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and have not been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. I may lower your hand once you begin speaking just to maintain the flow of conversation. During public comment periods, the public can raise your hands and you'll be called on when appropriate. If you're connecting by phone, you may need to press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on when you're speaking if desired. It is not required. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're using a phone, you may need to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. Again, you can send a chat to me or raise your hand during that period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members, and the meeting's being recorded. I'll pass it back to you, Karen, for the agenda. And thanks, Karen, for volunteering to fill the chair's duties in Robin's absence. She wasn't able to attend today, so thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for saying that, Amy. I neglected to introduce myself at the beginning. Karen Williams, voting member of the board and standing in today to facilitate since our chair is not able to be with us. So after our usual disclosure of communications and public comment, we do have quorum, so we can do the quick business of reviewing and approving our minutes from the last couple meetings. And we'll have about 15 minutes to go over some updates and kind of report backs from a couple of on a couple of topics, the natural resources group, let's call them, as well as the recruitment subcommittee, and any report back from the testimony that voting member Bob Salinger delivered at the rate hearing. And then our main topic of discussion today is going to be surprise budget and sort of our next steps on following the testimony that Bob delivered on PUB's behalf. Where would we like to go next in terms of registering our opinions and concerns and things we might want to call out in favor of in the 24-25 budgets for the two bureaus. So let us move right along and ask anyone who has a disclosure to report regarding any communications with city officials in the last couple of weeks since we've met. Seeing any hands raised? Give another pause in case someone needs to speak up. Right, sounds like it's quiet in that department. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment before the Portland Utility Board? We'd love to hear from you.
Robert Butler would.
Very good. Yes, Robert, please go ahead.
This is Robert Butler. I'm a native of Portland, Oregon, and resident. So I was at the meeting where Bob Salinger diplomatically presented to me very disappointing news about the interest by the city council in this committee's analysis. And in fact, one of the first comments I made was that we need more than Hub to run this city, but that your input is vital towards our conduct in navigating these rough seas right now. So what I said was that I couldn't see on the presentation by the city that reality was in front of us for the next 3 or 4 years, which was a flat revenue look and flat debt look, and of the forecast and current budget and going forward, taking into consideration that within the next 18 months, starting by your next fiscal year, July 1, we will spend over $1 billion in the sand filtration project at Bull Run. I call it the sandbag project. And I was very disappointed that that wasn't clear in the presentation by the city. Right after I got finished speaking, someone jumped out of the crowd and said they were working on this, and that what we're going to do is we're going to borrow not just the $752 million from the feds, but we're going to borrow everything. We're going to borrow $1.9 billion. So that wasn't, that was a surprise to everyone in the city council, including Commissioner Mapps, oddly enough. So my point being here now is that this committee, I don't know, I hope that one of your main themes is the finance stability of the city. In other words, when you budget, we need to know what we're going to do, but does this committee concern ourselves with the fact that we're diving ourselves into debt and destroying our credit rating, for example, and how that influences our future? And so we are $1.4 billion in debt right now because of the big pipe sewer project by Vera Katz 7 or 8 years ago. We paid nothing towards principal on that project. Now we're talking about $2 billion more, various sources of debt, all debt. And I'm very concerned about the fact that we're going to devalue our credit rating from AA or whatever it is to something lower. That'll increase our costs, increase our expenses for the city as a result. And so I object to that part of the budget. I objected to that part of the budget. And then supposedly you have feedback by now from the city. If you don't, then we've been let down one more time. So I'll kind of finish by saying that I'm not quite done yet, but I'll say that this is our second rodeo. Our first rodeo with PUB was in 2017, where we had the workshop on the sandbag project, $2 billion, where there's no analytics whatsoever in terms of the benefit to the health of the city as a result of that project. Are we going to save one life or not? And we don't know and don't care at this point what the analytics are, although it's possible to come up with them quite easily. I don't have time to explain that now, but I will explain that in 2017, Hub was also a no-show. So curiously enough, Commissioner, I'll mispronounce her name, Idule, said that she wanted input from Pub as to the relevance of our decision to go forward with the sandbag project. And oddly enough, she was the only one who said that. It kind of meant a room of silence. And but I think she had something then which was very important. And still, 8 years later, Pub is still not at the table, because we weren't at the table at the meeting with City Council about the budget at all, quite frankly. Well, I'm going to tell you now that two things. One, I think the suggestion is, one is the sandbag project should be criticized, at least looked at in some analytics, so far looked at in the dark, as to its benefit, and it has no benefit over the second alternative, which is the ultraviolet approach, which is $1.5 billion cheaper. So from the city won't tell us, but from good sources, it's about $500 million for the ultraviolet treatment. It's very effective, and $2 billion for the sandbag project, which does not have ultraviolet to kill the cryptosporidium that is also a non-serious disease. So the second point was gone over, I'm sure, but the second point, sorry, is that the finance part of it is a very important part of the question. I see silence from everybody in the room and everybody in the city practically. Are we putting ourselves in a lower credit rating as a result of another $2 billion likely to overrun? And what's the implication there of ignoring our debt service? Thank you for listening. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. Good luck on your work. I'm on your team in terms of getting City Council interested in your input. And so count me as not as a leader, but a follower, and a darn good one. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Butler, for your comment. We very much appreciate you taking the time to come and be here and speak to the pub.
You're entirely welcome.
Are there any other members of the public? I am noting a couple of hands from our Commissioner's office and ex officio member, but before we go there, are there any other public comments, Amy, that you've been made aware of, or anyone else in the audience that would like to speak to the pub?
There's nobody else who signed up in advance.
All right, hearing none, thank you for, we'll go ahead and close the public comment period. And I think Jack, just going in order of hands, but I think Jack had their hand raised first. So Jack, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. Introducing myself here, as Karen noted, I'm Jack Jaden, they, she pronouns, with Commissioner Mingus Mapps' office. And Robert, thank you so much for coming to this meeting. I know that we've interacted a number of times at council, but I would still like to offer to connect with you after this if you'd like to talk at all. We certainly appreciate every time that you come to speak. And I just wanted to briefly just correct a fact here that Commissioner Mapps was not actually surprised by the presentation that was conducted on the rate hearing. He was very much part of the planning and received pre-presentations multiple times. But we can connect and find out which part of it maybe appeared that he was confused about it. Water Bureau has been proficiently planning their rates and their financing for a number of years. They purposefully plan it so that there's not rate hikes, that it's a smooth expected curve, and that this project is federally mandated by the EPA. So thank you so much. And again, I just wanted to offer myself as a resource.
Thanks for speaking, Jack. Really appreciate that. Joanne, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Karen. I'm Joanne Johnson. I'm a staff at the Portland Water Bureau. I serve on the equity and policy team. And I just wanted to offer to Mr. Butler that it's my understanding that the filtration project does offer benefits, in that it also, in addition to filtering out cryptosporidium, it can give us some resilience in the event of getting silt or other debris in our water. It can help us filter that out. So like when we had all the forest fires last summer, had any of those impacted our water and we had the filtration plant, we would have been able to filter that debris out of the water and avoid, further action by the public to keep the water safe. I also wanted to offer, I'm on the equity and policy team, so filtration and those projects are not my area of expertise, but I know there was a long public decision process about how the Bureau arrived at building the filtration plant. And if this group would ever like a refresher on that or a presentation on how we arrived at the decision to build the filtration plant instead of UV, I'm happy to connect with our staff and get the right person at this meeting for that presentation.
Thanks so much, Joanne, for speaking to the topic of public comment and offering your expertise to the board and your colleagues' expertise to the board. Appreciate that a lot. I believe we do have a quorum now, and we have 2 sets of minutes from March 5th and March 11th. Actually, 2 sets of minutes, one from the pub meeting, one from the recruitment subcommittee that met on March 11th. So I'll give folks a couple of minutes to scan through those if you haven't had a chance. And please speak up if you note anything that either was omitted or needs to be corrected. Seeing any hands raised, I will take that to mean that folks are satisfied with the recording of those 2 meetings. Thanks for compiling those, Amy. All right, a few updates or report backs. This is the proper name. Natural Resource Service Delivery Assessment Project Team. Bob, thank you for attending, I guess maybe not the first official meeting, but sort of the meeting before the meeting, the pre-meeting of that group. There is I guess the first official meeting of that group tomorrow. And after you say a few words about that, Bob, if you would like to, I have a question for the board. But Bob, is there anything you'd like to convey to briefly to the board about your experience? And I think are you muted?
Sure, I'll be brief. We did have a pre-meeting. I was one that attended on behalf of the pub. I believe Julie and I will both be there tomorrow, at least for part of it. I'll be there for the whole part. I thought it was a very frustrating meeting, to be very candid with you. I thought we lacked direction, goals. I didn't come away from that meeting feeling any better about that. I think it's going to be challenging because I think there's varying degrees of background of the people that were appointed. There was a lot of silence in this meeting. It was hard to coax people even to express what questions they had. So it was an interesting meeting that I think left more than one person feeling like we maybe just spending a lot of time on process, but without a clear destination, it's going to be hard to get this group be able to be similar to some other situations we're in, to be able to come up with an outcome. So I hope tomorrow is more focused. I also, again, very candidly feel that there is a real divide between BES and parks that is undermining the process as well. And different goals from the two bureaus, and how is that going to sort itself out? So tomorrow we're meeting with non-director level staff, I think, to talk through some things. We have a very short timeline. So and one comment I made, and I'll end here, was that we've rearranged the entire city of Portland government already. This is one of the few pieces that got held back, and that's fine. But we've done this massive, massive thing, and this is a relatively speaking small thing. And I worry that we're making it into too big of a thing. I think if we put a framework in place for our natural resources unit, either inside BES or outside in the service area, I think that at least puts a placeholder in place for the next council to work with it and figure out what exactly it does. I think if we want every question answered before we make any move, I think the org chart will stay as it is. The next city council will not get to it for a long time, and it will just get marginalized. And so that's my hope, is that we at least put in a framework within the new city structure that we can work through over time, but that there is a placeholder to do that work. I'll end there.
Great, Bob. Thank you, and for the report back and recommendation. Looks like Director Chiama, Dawn, has a comment. Please go ahead, Dawn.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Karen. And my name is Dawn Uchiyama. I'm the director of BES. I want to thank Bob and other members of the pub who are tracking this topic. The amount of time and energy that needs to go in it, with kind of the sentiments that you currently have, is a lot to ask for, and I'm just very grateful for the time and the attention that this project has been given. And I will ask you to continue to participate and have faith in the process. And to keep communication lines open. We will be trying our best to state clear outcomes, and have this not just be process for the sake of process, but to really make a difference, and to inform Portland's environmental agenda, its natural resource agenda, its climate agenda, and all the things that we love so dearly about Portland. For the record, I just want to be really clear that BES is not abandoning the Bureau's environmental agenda. We are right now putting a lot of energy and focus on our one of our largest environmental responsibilities, that include our treatment plants and our pump stations. There are a lot of needs there. But it's an and statement. We're going to do that, and we're aiming to grow the city's environmental agenda in a broader and more well-supported space. I, like Bob, do not want to have this be a battle between parks and BES. We need to join forces, and we need to contribute our resources into a bigger space, a broader space, a more well-supported space. And I have been very clear about inviting our sister agencies, including the Water Bureau, Transportation Bureau, and the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, to all join with us and to help us articulate a vision that the community has confidence in and can get behind. And I want to offer that I will exercise my leadership and my voice in this space to create a work plan and outcomes that this committee can stand behind and feel good about. I know that at this point, these are just words, and we'll see how this plays out. But I especially just want to thank PUB for your attention to this topic, your engagement in this topic, and to please keep the communication lines open as we move forward. I want this to be meaningful, and I want better outcomes. And I need your engagement and involvement and your good thinking moving forward. So thank you for the time to make comments. And again, my door is always open. I'm happy to discuss this with folks, and I look forward to the work that we're going to do this next year.
Thank you, Director, and thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to come to our meeting. We really do appreciate that as well. Okay, we have one more update which I will go ahead and give before we get into business, and that is the recruitment subcommittee, of which I am a member, as is Heather, as is Alexis, as is Arshad Aladadi, and as is Jack Jaden. So we met on March 11th, as you read in the minutes, and we will next meet a few days after today for our next steps. But the one item we did make our way through, we received 11 applications. We all were able to review them. They were all very appropriately redacted of names and identifying characteristics and that sort of thing, which was great. But we reviewed all 11 applications, and thanks to a very forward-looking and community-minded proposal from Jack Jaden, we made a decision to approach the interviews differently than we have really ever in my experience on the pub. And that is, rather than interviewing applicants as a kind of traditional job interview, one-on-one with a panel, we decided that based on some models from other community-based committees, that we would like to do essentially a group interview, maybe two groups, because we do have 11 folks, and that's a lot to get to speak in a meeting. But we haven't fully. We're looking at some other examples that Jack brought to us from other community committees, and at our next meeting on the 25th of March, we're going to be kind of filling out and coming to some decisions about exactly how we'll conduct this, and then reach out to the groups of applicants, like I said, most likely in two groups, and two groups of 5 or 6 folks each. And our one of the intents and goals of conducting interviews in that way is to get a feel for how people work with each other, kind of assessing those relationship skills and perspectives and methods that it's really hard to kind of put your finger on when you're talking with someone just one-on-one in a somewhat kind of scripted environment. So we'll bring you more information after the 25th, so probably at our next full board meeting. And just if anyone has any questions or comments about that, happy to take them here. And otherwise, we'll move on with our business. And Heather, is there anything that you would like to add to that? I know Heather's connecting from the field today, so I'm not sure how easy it will be for her to connect or speak up, but I want to pause for a moment just in case you have something to say, Heather.
Sure. Thanks for that update, Karen. One thing that I want to emphasize in doing these group interviews that we all felt was very important on the subcommittee is just the fact that doing panel interviews with one person feels very high pressure and high stakes. And for a volunteer non-paid position, it really shouldn't feel as scary and as anxiety producing and high stakes as like a permanent position paid job interview. So I want to thank Jack for bringing this new way of interviewing to our attention.
Thanks, Heather. Super. All right, let us move on to matter at hand. So back back to Bob. I'm putting Bob on the spot a lot today, but Bob also gave a thank you again for your time and talents and thoughts in pulling together a really meaningful testimony and delivering it so ably. So is there anything, actually, I mean, Amy has the highlights from the rate hearing presentation, but I did want to open the floor to Bob again to see if there was anything that you wanted to reflect on, Bob, or wanted us to consider as we kind of proceed with next steps on the budget.
Excuse me. There is, if I can catch my breath. Yeah, I thought probably the best thing is for people to go and watch it. My testimony was about 8 minutes. There was a lot of follow-up. I tried to get a couple of things across in that. One, that we didn't have enough preparatory time, information, whatever, to make a recommendation. Two, that we were concerned about it going down, that we weren't recommending that. And three, that we needed to think hard about how we go forward as a budget advisory committee. We needed to put some real thinking into that, and that we couldn't just write this year off as the result of the transition, because the year before that it was something else, the year before that was COVID. There's always something. So how do we, given the current dynamics and challenges, build this committee in a way that's meaningful? What is that going to take? I thought the council was responsive and interested. They asked a lot of questions. There was some discussion. They made it clear that they wanted our recommendations on that. And I also appreciated Don's comments as well about, working with us on that. So I think the ball is back in our court. I think we should think hard about how to incorporate that into our ultimate budget comments, which are still ahead, or do it as a separate thing. But I think we should think about how we want to reply to that and what's going to make us more effective as a budget advisory unit. The other thing I would just flag for folks, and again, I would encourage people to watch this one because I think it was pretty interesting, is Commissioner Gonzalez did make a statement at the end about how, well, last year he didn't appreciate the testimony, and he gave us some pushback on that. I decided not to respond from the podium because I felt like if I did, it would just flare and go nowhere. But I did ask to speak to him afterwards, and we had quite an extensive conversation in the hallway. And what I tried to convey to him was that whether he strongly disagreed or agreed with what we were saying, that it was important that he give us the airtime and the space to say it, and that the power is on their side of the dais, and that I felt that their pushback had a chilling effect, had made people more reluctant to go before them, had in some ways suppressed our ability to communicate. That was one of the problems that we needed to address, and that he really did need to, in my opinion, recognize the power dynamic of a mayor and a commissioner going after somebody in the middle of their testimony. They always have the opportunity to reject what we say. They have that power. But I think they owe it to us, even if we're saying things that they find problematic, offensive, disagree with, to give us the space to get that out. And then they can have a conversation about what they want to accept or not accept. They can ask questions. I thought, without speaking for him, because I don't want to do that, that he was listening pretty carefully and was thinking about it. And I think it's fair to say that he did express some concern and maybe some recognition that, yeah, okay, there was some concern that yes, it had it may be a chilling effect or an intimidating effect or whatever. So I got the sense that he was thinking about it seriously. That's not on the tape, so I wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I wish I had been a fly on the wall, because I wish that had that had been taped. That sounds like a really meaningful exchange, and I thank you again for the advocacy at the meeting after the meeting, or the hearing after the hearing. That's great. That's great. I think, just my own personal opinion coming out here, I'm really glad that conversation happened, and because I definitely felt like when those sentiments were expressed last year, that it really, it's hard to say what hit home with people and what fell flat, but I certainly didn't get the impression that they heard or understood that, what about specifically the chilling effect and the just dissuading future community volunteers from, wanting to engage in again, really meaningful public discourse on vitally important topics. So yay, if that started to hit home, that's terrific. Okay, back to the then again, I keep saying matter at hand, but the particulars of the what came out of the rate hearing. Absolutely, if you haven't had a chance to, speaking to my fellow members here, to listen to the testimony and the response and the questions, please do. I want to thank Amy for the written summary that came to us as Rita had ahead of the meeting. That was really helpful, specific to me, particularly to have that summary. And on the slide we're looking at here is the sort of the lowdown of what came out of the rate hearing. The rates were in fact approved, and a couple of requests that came to us that we do need to deliberate on and figure out how we want to respond. I think we've already talked a bit about our engagement in the natural resources services ongoing work. Not to say there's not more coming on that, but more particularly on the budgeting process, how we kind of get the message across that we want earlier engagement. We want more, perhaps less, I don't know, to sanitize or scripted or something like that. Information, perhaps more granular information, information that is more tied to the values and the things that are important to us that we've expressed. How do we do that? I think we said some of those things last year. We said something in our annual report, but it, clearly it didn't take place this year. So I think we need to be a little bit more perhaps explicit and deliberate and exactly what we're asking for to have earlier engagement on budget matters. And to that point, Director Grew from the City Budget Office has sort of an open invitation out to Pub to let Director Grew know how that office can support our requests for information, perhaps information in a different form or a more accessible way for those of us who are not financial gurus. All right, see a couple of hands for comments before we engage in the discussion, or maybe as the beginning of engaging in the discussion. Joanne, please go ahead.
Thank you. Before we move on to the budget conversation, I had a question about the testimony. And so maybe this is a question for Bob, maybe it's a question for the group, I'm not sure. But the testimony talked a lot about, non-responsiveness and lack of information and just not enough information to support any particular, budget recommendation except for a rate increase. And I was wondering, has it been the experience of the pub that the staff are not being responsive, or that like which group of folks was that directed at? And I just, to my comment earlier, I want to do what I can if staff are non-responsive to like be a liaison and help get staff respond to your requests to come to meetings and make sure that we're giving you the information that you need, that we have to help, help you make decisions and recommendations.
Thanks, Joanne. I want to we'll go to Farshad's hand in a second, but for fellow board members, yeah, thoughts, responses. Go ahead, Bob.
If there's other folks who want to talk, please go, because I don't want to be the only one talking here. But if I don't see any hands, I have a lot of ideas. I didn't want to offer them at the hearing because I didn't feel it was my place to do that, given it's not my place to do that. The pub needs to speak as a unit on that, and we hadn't discussed a lot of this yet. And I also said in the hearing, this was not a criticism of staff. I want to, so I appreciate the question, but one of the things I did know was this wasn't intended to be a criticism of staff. I think staff has a uniquely difficult challenge right now. I think it's kind of a system that has fallen apart over time or not been built up enough over time, and we need to think about what those components are. But just a couple of ideas. So again, it's not targeting staff. I think to some degree staff are part of the overall disintegration. And what do we want to replace what we once maybe had with? But just a few ideas to prime the pump. One, I think we should have a budget 101 every year for everybody early, very early, in the summertime or in the spring, where we really go over what the budgets look like, how they function, basic pieces, and have staff come in from each unit and talk about their budgets and their hopes or challenges, their aspirations, whatever. So we really have a good grounding in how the budget lays out before we even start the process. To start the process very early, make it a very iterative process. Even if we're in a condensed thing like we have this year, start getting information and questions on the table early in the process. 3, restore decision packages so we have something to really grapple with, and separate out what's ongoing, what's leaving, and what could be coming in, so we can start to think and also add to that. I think that primes the pump for us having ideas, saying, well, while we're talking about the ad packages, what about these things as well? So just things like that, kind of mundane technical things that I think get us into the right knowledge level and mind frame very early. So the time we get to the end, we're grounded and we can speak from a place of knowledge and some confidence as well. And we've had back and forth so that there's a dynamic. We're not just saying we think staff got it right or wrong. We've had a chance to work through those things and maybe adjust them or decide that we do agree or disagree.
So there isn't a time though, like this year or last year before that, where we asked staff to come and like give a 101 or come and present and they just didn't respond or they said no. This is more of a new idea or a reinvigoration of an older idea.
From my perspective, yes. From my perspective, it's not a lack of responsiveness from staff. But again, I'm speaking just for myself here, obviously. It's just we don't have the systems in place any longer, I think, to be functional on budgets that are incredibly, incredibly complicated. These are not things you can just pick up, read, and say, oh, I like that budget line, but I don't like that one over there. I mean, you just can't do that. So how do you get in deep enough? And part of the goal of the creation of the pub originally was, even with the 6-month budget advisory committees, there was a feeling that having folks on permanently, and so you're kind of constantly engaged throughout the year and you're there from year to year, would allow us to get deeper. And in some ways, for whatever reason, I think we've gotten shallower. I think we can also do that with a high level policy piece as well, because I think in an ideal world, we marry our high level policy goals to actually budgets that come out, so they result in something happening. But I've talked too long, so I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Thanks for explaining. Because you did say that in the very beginning of your comment that it wasn't about staff, but as the testimony went on, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Joanne, for the question, and Bob for the additional explanation, or just, yeah, for expressing a little bit more context around the testimony. And I see Alexis as well as Farshad, and I just taking my chair hat off, facilitator hat off, and just to respond to Joanne's question. So I'm coming into my, coming into my 5th year, I guess, on the pub. And I mean, in fairness to the staff and the directors who have, I believe in very good faith, worked with pub and brought the information that they thought we were requesting in a form in which we had requested it. I do want to say, in my few years of experience on the pub, that obviously the personnel and the pub members and the experience they bring changes, and as does the focus and the priorities of the board. So we have, in fact, requested information focused in different areas and in different forms. So there's what I'm trying to say, kind of turnover and sort of on both sides, the community member sides as well as the Bureau staff and directors. So, sometimes it may be hard to know exactly what we do want, and we just have to be very, again, very clear and straightforward. In our requests. So I just wanted to say that there's definitely been some transitions, and then added this past year to the time question. I think we did make a pretty explicit request for earlier involvement and having budget presentations earlier, like in September-ish. But just with the transition and the work that the city was doing that then fell to the bureaus, right, to be doing all this pre-work to prepare for the transition in form of government. It just, I don't think there was enough time in the day to possibly be responsive to some of what we had asked for, and for bureau staff to do their due diligence and work that was being asked of them. So I'll leave it at that. Farshad, is it okay if I go to Alexis, voting member first, and then we'll circle back to you? Yeah.
Thanks, Karen. Well, I was starting to get kind of into this recommendations piece, listening to Bob triggered a few things for me as well. Sorry, I didn't say Alexis Rife, voting member of the pub, but I guess just to add quickly, and then Farshad, I'm not sure where you were going with your comments, but I had also jotted down a budget 101 every single year would be incredibly helpful. And I really like the idea of having staff come from different units to present to the pub. And then also recognizing varying degrees of literacy and knowledge around city budgeting processes on the pub, is I almost wonder, and I think maybe this used to be a structure that the pub had, or that other advisory boards within the city use, but really thinking about using our meeting, every other meeting, for subcommittee meetings or something along those lines. Could we have a subcommittee that's really focused on budget, and another focused maybe more on these policy pieces, and then we do joint meetings in order to do that kind of exchange, because of course it's so important. Budget and policy have to come together. And so I just wonder if that might be a way for us to implement kind of some deeper expertise or some deeper knowledge, and some members of the pub, rather than an expectation kind of that everyone can engage at these really deep moments. And then the other thing is, again, it's so hard to look at these really complicated and detailed budget without really understanding the full picture. I feel like we get good snippets of the full, we get a mention of the big picture, but not really understanding like what are these ongoing things that have to be met, what are kind of things that are kind of new things that are coming on, what is coming off, what is being seen coming down the line in 5, 10, 20 years. I think we get some of that, but maybe this budget 101 process or regular written updates or something along those lines would kind of help us understand kind of the big strategy and big picture flow of different activities as we go along. And I just want to kind of re-emphasize what Bob said about these kind of like decision points with along the way. And I think it's a good way for us to improve working on this topic is earlier to have that opportunity to kind of make adjustments along the way. Where there is opportunity to make adjustments, let's make sure that we are able to engage at those key points rather than kind of being presented with a baked package for approval. I think would be helpful. So those are just some initial ideas, and I'll stop there.
All right, well, members are thinking about other recommendations. Farshad, thanks for your patience.
Of course, I really appreciate the topic, and I really appreciate going after Alexis because I think she laid the groundwork for many of my comments. And I think I've said this in previous meetings. There's a real challenge with the budget being the single tool that is used to illuminate the Bureau's strategy and where it's going long term. It's really a keyhole, an annual keyhole into the Bureau's longer term strategy and our financial plan. And because of that characteristic, there's a lot of risk that people aren't going to understand that context, just as Alexis said. So I would end the process of developing does follow generally the same steps, but the timing of those steps and when certain unknowns or uncertainties become known that impact the budget happen pretty late in the calendar. It's really hard for us to share some of those budget decisions in a time frame that allows for discourse and influence, if those are the right decisions the bureaus need to make. So I think there's a structural problem here by being hyper focused on the budget as the sole kind of indicator for the bureau's policy and strategy and financial plan. So I would suggest that budget is an important topic, but I think maybe we can also talk about the Bureau strategy and our financial plan, and the budget is the annual implementation of those plans. And engaging PUB in those topics gives us, I think, that broader view that was being referenced, and is decoupled from the budget timeline. So that allows us to have those conversations, meaningful conversations, in a way that actually help us make policy decisions or strategy decisions that then will get reflected in the budget. And we can crosswalk kind of those conversations and priorities to what eventually shows up in the budget, and therefore the context would be established. So as PUB is thinking about process improvement, I would ask that we kind of raise our sights a little bit higher and see that there's more surrounding budget development than just kind of the annual technical process of getting all of the budget details in a format so that we can upload it. I think that's not, by that point, it is baked. We're talking about putting the baked thing in the budget. So we should be talking about Bureau strategy, long-term strategy. We're in the 100-year business. So if there are decisions that are in the budget today are really based on discourse that's happened over the last several years, right? So it's really difficult to make adjustments in the budget when there are fundamental questions about where the bureaus need to go and where the pub's interests are aligned. I think those conversations definitely have a home, and there's definitely sufficient time to have those conversations. But if we're focusing on more of the strategy and the financial plan first, and then like everything Alexis said, I think the technical budget 101 type presentations, we can do that for sure. But if we want to talk about what groups are doing, what value they're hoping to deliver to our community, engagement, all of that can be maybe in the strategic plan and financial plan framework rather than just limited to the budget framework. That's my comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Farshad. I appreciate the analogies you used. That was really helpful for me. One response that I have in the form of a recommendation, if I may, not seeing any other hands raised right at the moment, to this suggestion to not using the budget as the only tool to sort of understand and influence strategy. So let's look at some other tools and plans and decisions that are made outside of the budget cycle. And something that I had jotted down in my review of this year's budget was that I wasn't thinking of it being really in the context of the budget, but given what you said, Farshad, I think it would be, or would help me be better prepared to offer sort of comments and would give me greater insights when I actually do see the fully baked budget, is how the equity data toolkit is applied. I'd love to see a presentation on that, how each of the bureaus are using that in their priority setting, in their, allocations and investments and strategy. I would just love, honestly, I find the equity reports that go along with the budget, I mean, to me, maybe it's just because those are more words and less numbers and columns, but I find them to certainly be the most intriguing and in some cases illuminating and sort of understanding where the Bureau's priorities are. But they aren't, my observation from this year anyway, is that what they lacked, I guess, was, from my perspective, was that connection, and maybe there was no direct connection, but I'd love to see like this priority in the Bureau's equity plan, whatever it is, this is showing up in this year's budget, in that we are, investing in this program, or we're expanding this program by a staff person, or in this year, you're not seeing an investment in this program, but are, over the 5 years, you'll see that we're intending to grow this program. That's just a hypothetical example of, having more. So recommendation would be great to have more of an insight into how the equity toolkits are used to inform, ultimately what shows up in the baked budget. And then once those final reports do come out, just having more of a connection drawn between equity priorities and where those are showing up in the, whether it be in a program offer or a line item, or just some kind of connection to what we're looking at for spending in this fiscal year, and how that is informed by each Bureau's equity priorities. Thank you for that. Let's go to Bob and then Joanne.
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, to give a real world example, I do think we can have profound impacts on budgets. And I think it's how deeply engaged you are, and it's also playing up and down the political chain. It's bringing in the political leaders and the decision makers and the other folks into that discussion over time. It's not one-offs, it's multiple discussions. And the example I would give is when the city adopted its watershed management plan in 2007. The first year, there was $50,000 allocated toward kind of moving into implementation. The second year, there was 500,000. The third year, there was 50 million. And that was a direct result of a lot of different factors, but one of them was the discussions within the budget cycle of how do you take this new thing? We were doing a lot of green stuff, but this was a new approach. How do we take this and make it a real cornerstone priority for the Bureau? And the budget committees played a huge role in that. And it was a matter of socializing them to it, helping them understand what was in it, why it made economic sense, why it made short and long-term sense, and all those things that take a little while to resonate and for people to feel comfortable with. But there was no guarantee that we were going to 50 million. That was the result of a lot of conversations. And that's what I hope we can get to over time is, whether it's equity or environment or gray infrastructure or whatever it is, because I think we have a responsibility across all of those things. How do we start to have those conversations, not as one-offs, not as last minute decisions, but as if we think this is a priority, how do we move it through? And what are the budget lines that we're actually talking about? What are the actual specifics to make this concept a reality?
And just building on what Bob and others have said, I've been thinking about, Pub, we really want to have an impact and influence on the budget and on the strategies of the Bureau. We have priorities and equity priorities that we identified in our values and our letters to council. I wonder if we could get the deep dive and the meaningful impact if we picked a couple of priority areas, or a few, or 4 or 5 or 2, I need a number of priority areas, and then decided that those were the areas that we were going to try and influence and impact. It might meet our goals of having a deep dive in the budget and really understanding, the things that we care about, instead of trying to understand and impact everything.
I would just say that I think we need to understand, at least at a deeper level, everything, because I think a lot of those decisions are intersectional in terms of how it affects one part of the budget. And I think a lot of the really powerful discussions that we had back when there were budget advisory committees were, what are the impacts on long-term debt? What are the impacts on rate? As I mentioned, I think in a prior meeting, sometimes the business people, and there are a lot of business people on these committees, were the best allies because they didn't necessarily care about the issues that we were pushing per se, at least that I was pushing, but they were able to say, that's such a minor impact on the budget over the long term. Why aren't we doing this? Or we're going to save so much money over the long term on these other costs over here. This makes sense. This makes economic sense, even if there's a higher cost in the short run. And so I think really understanding how all these pieces fit together. Otherwise, I think we relegate ourselves to the role of simply being advocates for the few things we care about, or the limited array of things that we care about specifically, and not being an oversight committee for the entire budget. Because I think ultimately our responsibility is to integrate all these things and make them work together. And so when I hear Dawn say earlier, and I agree 100% with what she said, that we need to take care of the plant. That's not my top interest, frankly, as being a member. But I know that if we're going to do environmental work and environmental justice work, we're going to have to figure out how to marry that with the incredible liability we have at the plant. And if we just come in kind of one-dimensionally saying these things are important, we're leaving out half the equation. And then it's easy to not have it happen, or to not do it well, or to not think through how do you do it over an extended time period to get to Shad's comments. So I think it's got to be a both and.
We couldn't hear what you said, Amy.
Sorry about that. I'm having some technical issues. I just said, Don, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure if that was a technical problem on my end or not. So thank you for all the comments. This is such a healthy discussion. After the rate hearing and the exchange that Bob and I had, I have been giving a lot of thought to what the budget process was like this year, both internally and externally. And I want to let the pub know that we're going to be doing a short lessons learned, kind of documenting how the process went for us, and then having that help us define and scope next year. And so we'll be back, and it's really helpful to hear the comments here, but we'll be back when you're all ready to propose a calendar year that allows us to look at the big picture, look at the whole, the whole portfolio of BES, and then, of course, dive into details as you're interested, but then understand the specific milestones with budget development and submittal. So we're going to try to put a calendar together that looks at the whole thing and then get your input on where you'd like to be involved. So we're going to try to I know the word process gets thrown around a lot, and there can be too much process, there can be not enough process. I think this year we ended up on the side of not enough and not being clear about what the process is. We need to try to find the sweet spot of not taking people into so much detail they can't see straight, but having an overall handle on where the investments are being made. So just know we're going to do an assessment on this past year, do a lessons learned, and that will inform our recommendations on how to do better this next year. I am committed to doing better and being proactive, not waiting until people have concerns. So stay tuned for a proposal from us on how we'll be moving through the budget.
Thank you so much, Don, and apologies to the pub. I dropped internet there, so I'm glad to hear that the meeting has moved along. I did want to reach out to some folks we haven't heard from on this topic anyway. Heather, Julia, Chris, would you like to chime in with any thoughts, recommendations before we move on?
Sure. I agree that a one-on-one would be really helpful, especially since we do spend a lot of time on the budget to kind of get everyone up to speed. I think that would be really helpful. And that's about all I have to contribute.
Yeah, I've agreed with a lot of the things that have been said, which is why I haven't necessarily spoken up yet. And I know that we have a tough needle to thread here in terms of trying to balance the tension of busy commissioners with limited bandwidth, but also being effective and really meeting the goals, the collective goals I think we have about how we want to influence and advise on, both the strategies and implementation of those strategies, at the bureau level. But that is what we are here to do. It's what we were created for. And I think, so I kind of agreed with a lot of what Bob said in terms of this is a yes and. I do feel, I'm as I was observing all this information, seeing the interactions and the folks who've been speaking, it feels positive to me to see the responsiveness. I really appreciate that there's, the director is in the meeting today. Don, I really appreciate you being here and saying the things that you're saying and the commitment that looks like. I know we've been pretty vocally like displeased with a lot of things that have been going on in the last few meetings. And I think that that's really, I'm glad that we have felt frankly brave enough to air those concerns. And it feels like it's being responded to. And I want to acknowledge that. And I also feel like you're right about it being words. We got to get to the place where we're feeling like that we actually have solutions that are actionable and that we're engaging in them and that they feel real. So I don't think we are going to solve all of that in this one meeting right now today, but this is feeling like there's responsiveness, that there's an opportunity for charting a new path forward in a concrete way that hopefully leads to better outcomes that make us feel more satisfied, about not just process, but actual legitimate outcomes and how things are happening. So I want to acknowledge that this feels like a step in the right direction, and would want to see it continue. And I'm getting ready to lean in with all my fellow commissioners and trying to figure that all out, and also leaning in with all of the staff and trying to figure this out. So thank you.
All right, well, wonderful. Thanks, Chris and Julia for chiming in. And Heather, anything you wanted to add before we move on? And I'm sorry, I keep forgetting Heather is out in the field, so might not be able to connect super easily. Okay, all right. So no, the facilitator just noted the time and that we're half an hour beyond when this topic was supposed to have been concluded. But I think we did some work here that it wasn't just, we actually got some recommendations out on the table. So I think it's fair that we spend a bit more time on this topic than just saying, yeah, we need to make some recommendations at some point. We actually got some out, which is terrific. So let us move on, and I believe one more topic for discussion before we close. If Amy is still, yeah, there we go, wonderful. Maybe, let's see.
So the time on that last slide is somewhat arbitrary. I mean, really, the discussion that everybody was having is great. It's really valuable input. All of these slides were really mostly just to bring people along to where we are in the current year and figure out what Hub wants to do next. So I think the conversation has been rich about kind of the future visioning of engaging budget. So we just need to do some more work on that and kind of what the how those recommendations develop and the next steps on those. And at the same time, I didn't want to lose sight of the fact that we're getting towards the end of the current year's budget process and wanting to make sure that we are being responsive to what Hub wants as far as next steps related to that. If there were any specific information requests from bureaus or the budget office, or feedback that you all wanted to provide to council on this budget specifically, or whether that will all kind of fold into recommendations kind of for what the process looks like moving forward. So it's really just trying to identify what you all want as a priority, both for kind of what the next steps are and what to focus on at the upcoming meetings to make sure that we have the time to continue to move all of those pieces forward.
Okay. And thanks, Amy. Could you, either the slide before or the slide after that had a bit of a timeline for upcoming opportunities and what the next steps are? I just wanted to look at the dates. So let me put this to you, Amy. If we were to submit something in writing, and I'll show my cards, I'm in favor of us kind of tying up some somewhat loose ends and having at least a final statement, I guess, on this year's proposed budget. does it look like early May is the time to submit that, kind of in the kind of
I think
after
the
the
goal
community
would-
listening sessions? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the goal would be to turn it into the mayor and council in April.
Okay.
It's okay if it's towards the end, but basically over the next month and a half, they're kind of working on the rest of the budget details. So if there's any specific content that you want the mayor to take into consideration in developing and putting out that proposed, then you want to get that in his queue in April so that it's not missed. If they're more general statements and just kind of making the statements for the record, I think, May would be fine. I mean, it depends on whether it is an attempt to have an impact on specific decisions that remain, or whether it's more future looking and just to document for the record, then I think the timeline could be a little further out. I mean, one of the challenges that you all have is just your capacity, right? There's only so much meeting time, and when the meetings are basically every 2 weeks, there's not a lot of time in between meetings. And so just wanting to make sure that we are clear about what the priorities are for your time for the upcoming meetings, and that it continues to move you forward on kind of finalizing that document.
Okay. Okay. Let that sit with the members for a couple minutes and thinking about where you want to head next with this. Let me throw out a kind of a straw proposal. I already indicated, and I'm sorry, I don't have my camera on. This is Karen Williams speaking. I already indicated that I would be in favor of us putting together written comment, testimony, and having that on the record and for the record. Given everything that we've just been talking about, I'm not feeling confident like there's really an opportunity to influence much at this point. But I do think it's important to still document the elements of the proposed investments over the next year that we do support, and the areas where we have concerns, right? And maybe part of those concerns is because we don't have a good understanding or enough information to really be able to formulate an opinion, and that gives us a concern. And I do think, I mean, the rates have passed now, so I suppose anyway, I don't think there's a danger of them being I don't know, that being retracted or something. But at the same time, I do think it's important for the pub to make an explicit statement about the appropriateness of the rate increase, because I really do feel like that's in our purview and our area of responsibility, is to state pretty clearly that that's an appropriate rate increase or not. So I'd like to see us document that in writing. And yeah. Yep, that's all I wanted to say about that. So I'm kind of proposing that as a straw proposal, I guess. And perhaps I would think we could, if we have till the end of April, we could hash out something at our next meeting. We're not writing volumes and volumes, but I think we could put together a couple pages of thoughts. So that's what I am in favor of. Bob and Joanne, what next?
The only thing I would add to that is I think the one thing that did really stand out in this budget, because it was the one area, it was the one cut package that was proposed, was the environmental pieces, and they have nowhere to go. That's the conversation that we started with today about this potential natural resource unit, which may or may not happen. It looks like those natural resource pieces are getting covered by the by PSEF, but that's not a stable long-term strategy either. And once you take them off of the budget and put them somewhere else, if that money dries up for one reason or another, they're then orphans. So I think we should respond to that. And I think we should, you know, I know there's internal discussion within the Bureau about this as well, but since it's in the budget, I think we have to respond to what's on the page. I think we should challenge the idea that natural resource programs within BES are ancillary. That's never been a policy statement that we've reviewed or anyone has reviewed, as far as I know. That's new language. I think we should say that that's not actually currently the status. It is part of BES's purview. I think we should raise the issues about transferring them to PSEF. And I think the third piece is to say that if they are being, for whatever reason, downgraded within BES, that can only happen if, in fact, they have a new home to go to. It can't just be we downgrade them here and we hope they reappear somewhere else because they're important. So I think we need to take that on because that is the one cut package in this budget.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, Bob. I 100% agree with that. Thank you for making that very explicitly clear. Joanne.
Hi, Joanne again. For what it's worth, I did want to offer that although the rates have passed, if there are areas that you have questions or concerns and bureaus can provide information, I would really, especially if we have a concern because we don't have enough information, I would really encourage us to reach out to the bureaus because it does affect public trust. When the Portland Utility Board comes out and says, we don't support this thing, or we have concerns about this thing. I think everybody saw the recent news article. And I just want to say it does have an impact. And if there's a way that the bureaus can support you to get the information you need, let us know.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Joanne. I'm trying to turn my camera back on. This is Karen Williams speaking. I do appreciate that, and again, I don't want to at all reflect badly on staff or directors or anyone individually or collectively at all. But I guess my personal feeling is I just think we've kind of run out of time. I mean, I'm just thinking back to the questions that we did ask a few weeks ago when we had the opportunity to speak with the bureaus directly. And, I mean, we really didn't get answers to the questions that we asked. And I don't think that was, I mean, it was what it was. I don't think it was anyone's fault or anyone trying to be evasive or, anything like that. It's just, it seems like it's kind of late. But anyway, that's just my opinion. So I don't want to dissuade anyone from reaching out, particularly, I would say through Amy. If there is something gnawing at you that you really, in order to formulate an opinion about some element of the budget, you really need a piece of information that is not there or hasn't been conveyed in any of our presentations, yes, please do reach out to Amy and let's try and get an answer and some information for you so that we could put together some thoughts. And maybe we'll have fewer of those areas of concern because we don't have enough information. All right. Needing to move along as we wrap up here. So what is next full meeting
So
look
let
like
me just
there?
highlight.
Okay, just on to announcement.
I'll go back to the announcements, but because you were talking about kind of what comes next, I thought it might be helpful to just talk about the April meeting. So, by the next meeting, I assume there probably will be some information that folks will want to touch base on the natural resources, since there will be a project team meeting before then. And in coordination with the chair, Water Bureau had identified the filtration plant update for the April meeting as well. It's timely because they'll be going to council, and so want the opportunity to present some information to the pub first for your input and feedback. And then obviously the other main topic would be follow up on the budget kind of recommendations and ideas that are coming out of this meeting. I guess what I would ask of club members is just if you have either some specific recommendations or content that you're hoping will be included, try to touch base with me, email, phone, let me know the easiest way to connect so that I can try to compile that information for the April 2nd and April 18th meetings so that we can kind of go into those meetings as prepared as possible. And certainly if there's anything where you want some additional information from the bureaus or the budget office or from me, so that we can have as much information as possible as you're articulating those. So please reach out to me if there is any of that. And then just really quickly, the final pieces, just wanted to make sure you all had seen the announcement about the listening sessions related to council operations. The last one is this evening, so I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And we are still looking for a volunteer for the April 9th Administrative Review Committee. And then the final thing that I forgot to put on this slide is I had mentioned that I had the go-ahead to move forward with recruitment for the other staff support position for the pub. And so certainly I'm looking for some feedback from you all as to how and who would like to engage in that process as we move forward. That brings us to the end.
Oh, yeah. All right. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone for engagement. Hey, Karen Williams, acting co-chair, I guess, and facilitator. I will adjourn the meeting before my internet crashes once again.
Karen, I want to thank you for your facilitation of this meeting. You did an exceptional job, and I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Julia. Back at you.
Lots of appreciation.